Let's look on page 57 of the AAPL guide, number 1. And we'll just read through this together. But it starts off with Adam owns all of section 9, surface and mineral. So we're going to say that this represents section 9. And the first thing I like to do anytime we have a problem like this is I like to go ahead and put my directional corners in place. So this is going to be the northwest quarter, the northeast quarter. This is going to be the southeast quarter. This is going to be the northwest quarter. And this is going to be the southwest quarter. So then what happens is there is a series of conveyances, and we're just going to walk through each of those conveyances. And to keep track of where I am, I always put the number, like this is the northeast of the northeast, so I'm going to put that number 2 out to the side for the first one that we do. So the first one is Adam conveys the northeast of the northeast to Bob. So I'm going to go to my northeast quadrant, and then I'm going to divide it into 4s. And then I'm going to take the northeast of the northeast, which is right here, and I'm going to show that that is going to Bob. So I'm going to put that in a red color here. That is the northeast of the northeast, and that is going to Bob. And that is problem number 2, just in case I get stuck at some point. 3, Adam conveys the east half of the southwest to Charles. So here I am in the southwest, and now I'm going to divide that in half, and the east half over here is going to go to Charles. So I'm going to get a different color for Charles. This is going to be for Charles, and that's going to be problem number 3. The next one we'll look at is 4. Adam conveys the southeast to Dan. So let me get a different color. Adam is now conveying the southeast to Dan. So I'm going to color in the whole southeast here. And what's going to happen is by the end of the problem, whatever's left in black, I'll know that that is what belongs to Adam. So here we're conveying the entire southeast quarter to Dan. So this is to Dan. And this is problem number 4. But note that Adam is reserving 50% of the oil and gas. So instead of just having this all green, showing this all goes to Dan, I'm going to take my black marker here, and I'm just going to put 50% here. So I'll know that even though the color says it was conveyed to Dan, I'll know that Adam still owns 50% of that. And the next conveyance is number 5. Adam conveys the west half of the southwest to Ed. So Adam is going to convey the west half of the southwest. We already have the east half. Now we're going to do the west half of the southwest, and that's going to go to Ed. All right, and that's going to go to Ed. And that is going to be number 5. But notice that Adam is reserving 1/16. So I'm just going to put over here 1/16. So remember that Adam owns a 1/16 royalty interest. Okay? 1/16. Okay, that's not the clearest in the world, but you'll remember what that is. Okay, so then the next one is number 6. Adam conveys the west half of the northeast to Frank. So here's the northeast. Over here this belongs to Bob. And the west half, the entire west half, is going to belong to Frank. So that is going to be for Frank. But note that A is reserving 75% of the minerals. So even though this is owned by Frank, Frank is going to own 25%, and Adam is going to own the remaining 75%. So we'll know that's land owned by Adam. Okay, and that is number 6. So let's go to number 7. Adam conveys 1/32 of the oil and gas that may be produced and saved. And whenever we see produced and saved, we know we're talking about a royalty interest and not a working interest or a mineral interest. So Adam is going to convey 1/32 of the oil and gas that may be produced and saved under the northwest to George. So I'm going to divide this in quadrants. And the northwest of the northwest over here this area right here, that is going to belong to George. So actually, George is only getting a 1/32 interest. Okay, so this really is still belongs to Adam, but with this 1/32 reduced. Okay, northwest to George. Okay, you buy a lease from A, the lessor, for $100 per acre with a 1/8 royalty. So the first question that we need to know the answer to is, now we're just going to rely on our drawing. Complete the following. What is the lease description we're going to use? So now what we're going to do is we're going to go and find everywhere where it's black, and we know that that is where Adam owns an interest. So the first area that we look at is this whole northwest quarter. So we're going to put the northwest quarter. Remember, Adam owns in here. He just conveyed a 1/32 to George. So that's going to be the northwest. And the next area is going to be the northeast. We know this whole west half of the northeast is owned by A. West half of the northeast. And down here I'm going to put that they only own, A only owns a 75% interest in that. The third area, we're going to say, where is the northeast, is this little black area right here. And so we know that's going to be the southeast of the northeast. Adam owns that outright. And then we've got this whole southeast quarter. And Adam owns a 50% interest in the southeast quarter. Now, we're not going to include the property that was conveyed to Ed because A only kept a 1/16 royalty interest. Right now, we're interested in mineral interest only. So if we wanted to figure out what the gross, so this is what our lease description would be: the northwest quarter, the west half of the northeast, the southeast of the northeast, and the southeast quarter. So if we wanted to look at the gross acres that were owned by A, this would be 160. The west half of the northeast is half of 160, which would be 80. And we're not going to worry about this 75 until we get to the net acres. The next area is the southeast of the northeast. The southeast of the northeast is this area right here. So that's 40 acres. And then finally, the southeast, which is 160 acres. So if we want to do the calculation for the gross acres, it's going to be 160 plus 80 plus 40 plus 160. So our gross acres are going to be 440. To calculate the net acres, now we're going to add in these mineral interest. So Northwest, Adam still owns that 100%, so that's going to be 160. But he only owns the west half of the Northeast 75%. So we're going to go 80 times 0.75. And that's going to be 60 acres. So they only owned 60 net acres because they only owned 75% of the acres. Southeast, Northeast, they own 40 or 100%, so that's going to come down to 40. And then in the Southeast, they own 50% of the 160, so that's going to be 80 for their net acres. So if we want to calculate what the net acres are, then we're going to say 160 plus 60 plus 40 plus 80. And that's going to equal 340 net acres. Okay, so we've got the lease description. We know the gross acres owned by A is going to be 440. The net mineral acres owned by A is going to be 340. So what is the bonus that we're going to pay to A? And what did they say the bonus was? $100 an acre. So we're going to pay a bonus on the net acres. So 340 times 100 is going to be $34,000. We pay on the net. What does the rental do? If at $1 an acre, so 340 times $1, that's going to be 340 delay rental payment that's due. Then we're going to look at the acres entered on the lease form. You always put the gross acres on the lease form because there is a provision in the lease called a proportionate reduction clause that's going to allow you to then reduce the payment of the delay rental and the royalty payment based on the actual acreage owned. So for purposes of the lease, all you have to put in there is 440, and don't worry about any calculating the net for purposes of the lease because you've got that lease provision that's going to protect you for that. Then the rental amount entered on the lease form is going to be $440. Remember, because we're going by the gross acres, and that provision will allow us to reduce it. All right, now assuming the entire section is a lease and Section 9 comprises the spacing unit, what is A's net revenue interest? Okay, let's put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that. Let's do this one. A conveyed to Dan the southeast quarter. All right, so A conveys to Dan this entire southeast quarter, but doesn't reserve any interest. What happens if you include this southeast quarter on the lease? What interest would Adam have in a well drilled in the southeast quarter? And the answer, he would have no interest because he owns no interest. It's irrelevant that you put it on the lease itself. So now let's do the calculation for what A's net revenue interest is. Now the book will show you two ways to do this. This is how I always do my net mineral acre calculations. First thing I do is I take the 340 net acres and I'm going to divide that by the spacing unit, which is 640, times the royalty in the lease. So in this case, the royalty is a 1/8 interest, or a 0.125. So that calculation is going to be 340, the net acres, divided by 640, the total acres in the unit, times 1/8 the royalty. And that interest is going to be a 0.06640625. 0.06640,625. All right. Now, remember that A also owned, conveyed a 1/32nd interest to George up here. Okay, so we're going to have to deduct that from A's interest. And the way we do that is we know that this is a 40 acres. This here is 40 acres divided by 640 times a 1/32nd interest. So let's calculate what that's going to be. First of all, 1 divided by 32, 1/32nd. Oops. 1 divided by 32. That interest is going to be 0.03125. So we're going to subtract out from this net revenue interest here. We're going to minus that 1/32nd interest that she conveyed to George. Okay. And then we're going to add in the acreage where she retained a 1/16 right here. So that was 80 acres over the 640 times the 1/16. So let's look what that looks like. So we're going to do 80 divided by 640 times and divided by 16, it's 0.065. Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't remember that. 80 divided by 640 times 0.0625 is going to be equal to 0.0078125. So we'll plug that in. 0.0078125. Now I'm just realizing we didn't finish this problem. I calculated out what 1/32nd is, but let's calculate what 40 divided by 640 times 0.03125. And that's going to be 0.0019 0.001953. Okay, so we're subtracting that out, and then we're going to add this guy back in. So the net revenue interest for A is going to be 0.06640,625 minus 0.01953,125 plus 0.0078125 for the net revenue interest of 0.072265625. 0.072265625. And that is what A's net revenue interest is. Okay, now let's go on to problem number 2.